Welcome to all of you to this webinar on navigating life as a neurodivergent student at university. Really excited to have so many of you here and talking about the content we've been developing with a fantastic group of students over at Student Minds for our Student Space platform. We have the chat open, so if people would like to do introductions, say hello, maybe say where they're based, what they do, why they've taken an interest in this webinar. If you're doing any kind of work in this area or have any interesting practice or initiatives that you think would be really useful to share with your colleagues, then please utilize this as a space to do that. We also have the Q&A box open, which I'll be using later on when we get to the end of the panel discussion for questions for panelists. So I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat, but the Q&A function is probably the best place to put all your questions for the panelists, so I'll make sure I don't miss anything. But hello and welcome. We've still got people trickling in at quite a rapid rate, so very exciting. Yeah, nice to see you all. What we're going to be doing today is doing a little bit of information of talking about what is neurodivergent. So what do we mean with the language that we're using? What approach do we take in doing this project and working with our fantastic group of students and Dr. Ashley? Then we've got a panel discussion with a couple of the students we work with and Dr. Ashley to talk a little bit about the content, some of the themes we identified through the student steering group. And then we've got an opportunity for you to ask any questions, try and get any learning. And there'll be a little bit of call for action because some of the content we've developed is live now. Some of it is yet to come and will be launched in October, but we'll be following up with more information after the webinar. But hope you're all looking forward to this and hope you're all comfortable. So to get us started, what do we mean when we say neurodivergent students? So we use this to describe people whose brain functions differ from the majority of students. Neurotypical, and this may include, but isn't limited to, a number of different conditions. I won't talk through the list, but a number of different conditions. I think a lot of people often think of neurodiverse as a language, but when we talk about neurodiversity, we're obviously talking about the breadth of neurodivergence that we have across the community. We don't see this as something that's a deficit. We just see it as a different experience, a different way of kind of viewing and perceiving and navigating through the world. So hopefully that's a definition that's familiar and comfortable with everyone. What we know from literature, which kind of steered us at Student Minds to want to do more work on this, is we know that neurodivergent students are more likely to face mental health challenges, mental health difficulties, have difficulties and challenges with their executive function, receive barriers to diagnosis, adjustments and support. And this can lead to social isolation and can lead to a lot of stigma, can lead to challenges academically. And many of these members of these communities also acknowledge that there are strengths that come with these different conditions and identities, such as creativity, focus, building empathy, problem solving, pattern recognition. And in October, as part of the package, when we'll be following up after this webinar, we've got an insights report to go alongside all of this, which we'll be sharing out in the follow-up. So watch this space. So what resources have we been developing? We've got a number of resources. We've got a number of videos and podcast episodes that we've been developing. The videos are available right now to view and are available on Student Spaces, navigating the DSA, the Disabled Students Allowance application, letters to my past self, how to actually get stuff done as a neurodivergent student, and things I wish I knew before coming to uni as a neurodivergent student. And then the podcasts that we've created and worked with fantastic student steering groups to develop, similar to other of our content packages we've developed before. We've got topics including diagnosis, discovery in daily life, advocating for yourself, mental health and neurodivergent identities, the neurodivergent study survival guide, finding balance as a neurodivergent student, and beyond the classroom, placements, apprenticeships and years abroad. And all of these podcasts will be getting produced in partnership with All Things Mental Health, will be available everywhere you usually go to find podcasts. So they'll be available to you all as professionals and students themselves to engage with and share with various members of your networks and communities. And we'll be following up after the webinar to all the attendees to let them know when they're live, when to expect them. So our our approach to developing this has been similar to other of our content packages that we've been developing through Student Space. So we brought together a fantastic steering group of 8 neurodivergent students from across the UK to form a steering group to make sure we're really capturing those different lived experiences and identities. We also have been working with and recruited Dr. Ashley Liew, who facilitated all of the group meetings and brought a level of clinical expertise to this project, just to make sure that we were being really informed from lived experience and clinical expertise. Our approach very much was making sure that we're grounded and laying foundation in centering on lived experience, making sure we understand the intentions of this space. So not going right in with what we want to create, but actually just making sure we understand everyone's different experiences, reality, and identities, and give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves and build that trust. And then from there, we were able to design what we wanted to achieve through this project, what we wanted to develop, what content we wanted to create, and the resources that we thought would be most meaningful and useful to students and colleagues across the sector. So our call to action to all of you is, when the rest of the content is all live and launched, we will be following up with an email to let you know. Promote this, share these resources, engage with them, share them with your students, utilize them. They're there to be used as we develop these things, because we want to support the sector and having resources available to students. So just embed them within whatever your kind of support offering and packages are. Know that you can signpost to them, and in the meantime, the videos that are already available, do engage with those, share them on social media and your student newsletters, etc. So I don't want to hog up too much of this space, because this project has been wonderfully led by the student steering group and by Dr. Ashley. So the bulk of this webinar is an opportunity for them to kind of talk to you about their experiences in working with it, talking about the co-creation, talking about the themes of what we found while doing this project. So I'm going to allow all of the panelists to say hello and introduce themselves. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see them properly, and we'll get into some lovely discussion. So, Dr. Ashley, do you want to kick us off and say hello?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So yes, I'm Ashley Liew. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. So I work in the NHS in London, and I work primarily with children and young people up to the age of 18 with neurodevelopmental conditions. So these might be autism, ADHD, or learning disabilities, but also usually if they've got a neurological condition, so if they've got epilepsy or a brain injury. So that's my NHS work. I do have quite a bit of experience around both training and also having direct kind of contact with university students with a range of neurodivergent conditions.
And Arya, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I was having a few connection issues, so I hope everything's fine now. My name is Arya. I'm about to begin my final year as a student at the Royal Academy of Music in London. I'm pursuing a Bachelor of Music there, and I play the cello. And I wanted to take part in this steering group project because I know how much I would have benefited from having access to content created for neurodivergent students by neurodivergent students when I was first starting out university, or even progressing through university. So yeah, it's been a great experience.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Michael. I have just finished my master's in social work at Lancaster Uni. And yeah, why I wanted to be involved. So I'm looking at my other screen, so I'm not like just staring off into the abyss over here. But no, why I wanted to be involved was purely just because I know how challenging essentially it can be to navigate university living with neurodivergency, and it just felt important to bring some of those challenges but also strategies essentially out and help other students as well. So that's the main reason why I wanted to be involved.
Brilliant, thank you. So we'll jump right into some of the discussion, and I think what's useful as a place to start is talking about some of the themes that you as steering group members kind of identified, where you wanted to start, what you thought was going to be helpful and useful resources. So one of the themes was kind of looking at academic life and executive function. So Arya and Michael, start Arya with you. Could you share some of your kind of biggest academic challenges as a neurodivergent student?
I think, again, this is very personal to each individual, and everyone's experience is going to be different, especially also depending on the condition that you have. I don't even like calling it condition, it's just a different way of being. But for me, my issues, especially in an academic setting, were mostly revolved around concentration, having to read something 10 times over to be able to understand its content, especially being at lectures, for example. Sometimes your mind completely drifts off, even though you actively want to concentrate on what is going on and you want to understand what the lecturer is saying, but you just can't for some reason. And that can be a very frustrating experience to go through. Also, finding almost the necessary discipline and consistency to be able to concentrate for long periods of time to be able to get the work done. And that can be very difficult as well if you don't have specific systems in place. But again, that's just a matter of figuring it out over time. But also within an academic setting, I feel like for me, a lot of the times I find it very difficult to sit down and be still in lecture, especially if it's like an hour and a half long, let's say, and you just have to completely be still and pay attention to what the lecturer is saying. That can be very difficult. But yeah, for me, those have been the main challenges mostly.
Brilliant, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, it's funny you say sitting still because I'm literally sitting here already fidgeting. But yeah, no, one of my biggest challenges for me has probably been time management, independent studying. Like, I think especially with executive function difficulties, like structuring essays and keeping even on top of deadlines essentially, and even like just balancing workloads does not come naturally at all. And it's something that I've really struggled with. And I've had to build so many like routines quite intentionally around me, and even using simple reminders. Like the amount of post-it notes I had in my uni room was insane. I think someone probably thought I was solving like murder mysteries or something. And I had the amount of things I had to break down into small manageable steps and just little tasks was, I don't know, it's like recipes for cupcakes at this point and writing a simple essay. But when these systems were in place, it helped me to be able to thrive, helped me so much more to be able to do the uni work that, you know, my other peers was doing. It just took so much more effort behind the scenes for me to do it than my peers. And also another challenge I think that came with academic life was essentially just the amount of self-advocacy I had to do. And it's something that came up so much in the steering groups was self-advocacy. The amount of times we kept on saying we have to consistently fight for ourselves and challenge and argue. And it's been really important for me. And it's learning how to explain my needs and my diagnosis to my tutors, to my my lecturers, to even like my support staff, like in the I don't know what they call it, student learning support. Yeah. It's even learning how to say that, but also navigating support like DSA, actually figuring out how to do that. And to be honest, it's not something I never knew how to do at first. And there's so many barriers to facing it, but it's actually just like advocating for yourself to overcome that as well and finding support. But they've been, the main challenges for me personally.
Thank you. You got lots of strong nods the second you mentioned self-advocacy, so I'm sure we're going to dive deeper into that later. Dr. Ashley, we're already using some lingo that maybe not everyone attending might be familiar with, so would you mind explaining what executive dysfunction is and kind of how you see it affecting patients that you work with?
Sure. So executive function is a set of mental skills, essentially, that pertains to when you take in information, how you deal with that information. So how do you organize, manage that information, how you link it possibly, maybe with past memories, and then the outputs of that. So do you hold back some information? Do you, go ahead and, give a very long explanation? Are you sensing the situation is one that just requires a short answer? So it's really that whole process and that whole circuitry around trying to organize kind of information. From a scientific kind of perspective, it's a fairly new concept. So it's something that has only really been described by psychologists and doctors as we've come to understand the brain, and we've been able to query the brain in a more systematic way. So, so we've been able to use tests, tests that you might do with pen and paper, or I guess more usually on computers nowadays kind of thing. But then twinning that together with, say, taking pictures of the brain through images, on MRI machines, but and then other ways that we investigate the brain. So kind of ways that we measure brain waves within the brain kind of thing. It's generally a set of circuits that seems to be united by the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like in the front bit of our brains. And for those in the audience that know about kind of brain development, they'll know that, this is the bit of the brain that actually evolves the latest and actually distinguishes us, I guess, as human beings, compared to maybe other animals. And it's the bit that helps us inhibit things, be more flexible in the way that we think about thoughts, and then hold information so that we can then try and use that in a useful kind of way. So practically, you've just heard what Michael and Arya have been describing as ways that when there are differences in executive functioning, that's how it might result in concentration difficulty, in difficulties inhibiting, say, movements, or hence being restless and fidgety, but also inhibiting, say, a verbal response, so kind of like, say, impulsively saying something, kind of what people would say around kind of talking before you think. It also impacts your emotions and your behaviors, because actually we know that the brain's this real big control center, that integrates our thinking and our emotions, and then how that then comes out in our actions and our behaviors. So simply put, if you've got difficulties with your executive functioning, you'll experience difficulties at that thinking level, at that cognitive level, but it also then affects kind of maybe how you manage your emotions and what comes out as part of your behaviors.
Brilliant, thank you. So moving on to another theme that kind of came up through steering group discussions. Michael, we'll start with you this time. Can you talk about the kind of social expectations of university and how they impacted you and your experience?
I spoke quite a lot about it in the steering group, and it was the fact that how uni comes with so many kind of expectations in a way to be social. In a way, like it comes with the fact of, you're meant to go out and make new friends and join all these societies, or go clubbing, have flat parties, and just constant group work, simple things like that. And that was something I found so challenging, so overwhelming as well. And I think there's a lot of pressure at universities to kind of like mask, to like fit in with like what you think what other students look like. And for me personally, that was so exhausting and led to such like burnout in myself. And I'll speak about it later, but I was diagnosed quite late into I was about first year uni when I was diagnosed with my neurodivergency. So for me personally, I didn't even know that I was masking, and I didn't even know that I was being burnt out. And it was the fact that that all led to, difficulties with having a social life, and being myself and be able to bring my authentic self forward. But I mean, over time at university, I really learned that it was okay to kind of set boundaries. And it was something, again, I spoke in a group about, choosing such smaller social settings in a way, like, creating spaces that I felt safe in a way, and I felt comfortable, and where I can just be myself. And I mean, Arya, you were saying it as well, like neurodivergent looks so different for everyone. And I think for me, it was just figuring out where and when essentially I can kind of just drop that mask and be my full self, because of, I kind of really had to create these spaces where I could do that and be that person. And I found, the social life part, I found it more comforting dropping that mask around other neurodivergent people, because I could see, myself in them.
Brilliant, thank you. Arya, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. I think the thing that I want to touch on is, before coming to university, I was always told, like, university is the best time of your life. You have to do everything at once. You have to go to all these social events, go join all the clubs and societies. You always have to be available for going out and have a drink, but you also have to study, and you also have to do this and that. And I feel like a lot of the times you don't have any time to rest with all of these expectations, and being able to keep up with the fact that, again, everybody expects for you to be available for all social plans all the time, and then also taking time for yourself to be able to recharge away from that. That's a difficult thing to balance a lot of the times. And especially, I think, for neurodivergent people, if you're in such crowded settings all the time where you're receiving a lot of different stimulants at once, that can also be very overwhelming for the brain. And then it's kind of like what Michael's saying, you just sort of, to cope with it, you have to mask after a certain point, and then it leads to huge burnout. it's almost like these unsaid expectations that we all sort of have to deal with. But again, for neurodivergent students, it can be very difficult because it almost is creating an environment in which you're not really allowed to show up as your full self, like you said, Michael. And that's something that's difficult to navigate. And over time, I mean, we're going to touch on it later, but one has to sort of make the difficult decision of saying, I come first and I need to set certain boundaries to be able to protect myself from this. But yeah.
Well, you've mentioned kind of masking and boundaries, and how do you approach managing? And this is a question to both of you, and managing the need to mask, the need to manage those boundaries, and when do you feel you are most supported and able to be your full self? Oh no, Michael's in there. Go for it.
Sorry, it's a bit of an awkward moment there. Yeah, no. How do I manage masking is an interesting question because I think like as I was saying before, sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing it. Like I think it's just like a natural thing that just comes up, and I'm like, oh, it's when I then leave that environment, I'm then like, oh, I'm exhausted. Like I'm so tired. And I found it so much with like my placement. As I was saying, I do social work. So like in the placement, it's very professional, right? Like you're filled with people from all different walks of life and different professionals. And it's the fact that when I'm sitting in a meeting, I've got to be that professional self, and that mask goes up, and it's so exhausting. I actually still don't think I've come up with a way of like figuring out how to not do that or learned how to do that. But I think the place that I probably will learn at is from other neurodivergent people, right? Like word of mouth and learning from other people who have sussed it out is, I think, the most efficient way for me to learn it. Oh yeah, I don't know if you have.
Like I said, masking is a protection mechanism. I think at least for me, it is a lot of the times. And it's something that I really struggled with in my university life because people have expectations of you and they expect you to be a certain way. That's reality. We all have expectations from people. But at the end of the day, it's about being able to say, and like I said, that's a very difficult decision to make because you're, again, doing a big self-advocacy in that moment, saying, I need to protect myself from this and I'm going to remove myself from the situation. That's something that I really struggled to implement into my life at first because we're social creatures. We want to fit in and we want to get along with people. And sometimes it's really hard to say no to certain things. But actually, I realized that being able to place boundaries, first of all, it has nothing to do with the people around us. It has everything to do with us and taking care of our well-being. So I think that it gets a lot of negative sort of rep a lot of the times as if it's almost a threat to other people, but it has nothing to do with that. It's completely about us taking care of ourselves. But I think that actually placing boundaries allowed me to be a better friend and to be a better person overall because I am able to say to people, I don't have the energy to mask right now, and I want to be able to show up as my full and best self when I'm interacting with everybody. So I'm going to remove myself from this situation, recharge, and then come back to it when I feel that I can do so. And I feel like spaces like the steering group meeting, for example, spaces in which people can relate to each other through shared experiences, those are the best spaces for one to be their true self. And I feel like I was able to do that very easily in the steering group because everybody was incredibly respectful of everyone's boundaries. Everyone was incredibly respectful of everyone's opinions. And we were just able to have a very nice, safe space to be able to share our own experiences. And yeah.
Thank you both. I mean, it's really interesting hearing how much commonality there is across lots of your experiences and lots of the different identities. But I'm also mindful that there's probably going to be a lot of difference in lots of people's identities and how they manifest and present. It's not a homogenous experience when we're looking at neurodivergence. So, Dr. Ashley, could you tell us a little bit more about how you see it kind of present differently for people?
Yeah, I guess we've already heard some of those differences in it. So whether that be differences in social communication and interaction, whether it be around more thinking skills, so we've heard about attention and organizing, impulsivity. Maybe some of the things that we haven't heard so far have been maybe people with a neurodivergent condition that struggle a bit more with language, so understanding language or then using language in a functional kind of way, or they have more specific differences like tics, for example. So kind of like involuntary kind of like sharp movements of their body, or that that they have to kind of make an utterance that they can't control. So there's a whole range. Clearly, it's, like you said, not homogeneous, and it's a variety of experience. I suppose one important thing is also just to think about the intersection of that between neurodivergent conditions with other areas, which can happen across, one's lifetime. But particularly, I think that during that time that you're a young person and you're coming to university, and just what's happening as part of your life. So for example, leaving home and spending more time with peers, having to be independent, for some of the kind of like self-care activities that that you might have had a bit more support with in the past, and that time of life and the intersection with all those aspects that you're discovering as part of who you are and how you are within society, that also intersects, with some of the more specific neurodivergent aspects that we're discussing here. And a couple of comments about masking, because since we've been discussing that so much, kind of thing. So psychologists tend to kind of refer to it as social camouflaging. So that kind of idea that how if you're a chameleon and you're trying to blend into the environment, and I think we've heard two slightly kind of different experiences through Michael and Arya's and that kind of thing. So part of that of Michael's experience might be that actually you discovered that you were masking when you hadn't even realized that you were consciously doing that, Michael. And some of that, like Arya was pointing out at the end, might be just a very automatic, reflexive tactic, defense kind of mechanism. And I think that Arya's right, that actually none of that's negative, because I think that for that person's own well-being, that might be the appropriate thing. However, I think having insight and discovering that one's masking or camouflaging can then be that turning point, which itself provides a bit of a stress, isn't it, for that individual. So actually using that in a positive way and meaningfully to then seek support or to find peers, like Arya was saying, I think is a thing that is really required. And what often comes together with that concept around camouflaging and masking is about insight, because actually if some of that is semi-conscious, then it's about kind of actually a growing understanding and awareness of that neurodivergent person's own differences. And again, I think that we've really heard some really good examples where there are better spaces that people might feel more open to talk about that. We've talked about self-advocacy and self-identity, which I think are really important aspects that need to be encouraged and supported, within our university campuses, to allow then those individuals to then feel like they can be more authentic, as we've been discussing, but actually also then be thinking about how they can take the next step within that journey to understand things further, for their own well-being, their own understanding. And actually, I would argue, it has ripple effects in terms of it being more positive for their peer group, their faculty, their course, and the university as a whole.
And you've set me up beautifully to segue in talking about how having a diagnosis can be incredibly empowering and providing that insight and understanding of your own experience and making it make sense. So I know that was a theme that came up in the steering group. So Arya, in steering group, how there was a lot of conversation about how neurodivergent students face unique challenges navigating university, whether they do or don't have a diagnosis, and what was that like for you?
So Michael talked about how he got diagnosed in the first year of university. I had a very different experience from that because my parents are medical doctors, and also my entire family is neurodivergent, and that's something that everyone's known for a very long time. Also due to, like I said, them being medical doctors. So I got diagnosed when I was 7, I believe, and it was something that I always knew. And like I said, my entire family had a diagnosis. So it was something, it was a topic that always came up in my house and how to deal with certain things. But I think the thing that I found most difficult to navigate when I came into university was there was a time in which I was surrounded by people who were very against the fact that neurodivergent students were able to get adjustments and neurotypical students were not. And because they felt like neurodivergent students were getting an unfair advantage and they were able to get better grades because of that and things like that. I felt a lot of shame around the fact that I had a diagnosis for a very long time. And also I didn't, we'll get to this later, but I didn't find out that we were able to request adjustments a few months into my first year of university. But when I did, I also didn't get it for a very long time because I felt a lot of shame around it. And so that was the most difficult thing to deal with, because I almost felt like if I got an adjustment because of, again, what the people around me were saying, I was weak in a way. But I remember I spoke to my tutor about it, and after a certain point, also, again, communicating with my friends who are also neurodivergent, over time, I was able to build that confidence in the fact that it's not a weakness, it's just completely a different way of being. And actually, neurodivergent people have a lot of strengths. For example, a lot of musicians are neurodivergent because neurodivergent people are incredibly creative and innovative people. And yeah, I think that coming to terms with that, and that's again also a form of self-advocacy, actually, is asking for help when you need it. So being able to ask for the adjustments that I needed and building the confidence to do so, that was the biggest challenge for me. But I think that, again, overall, it's been really rewarding to be able to go through that process.
Brilliant, thank you. Ashley, do you know what role kind of self-understanding and self-diagnosis plays when it comes to someone's well-being and accessing support?
Yeah. I'm going to caveat my answer that this answer is probably valid for 2025, and I suspect actually that even within the next 5 to 10 years, kind of thing, it might actually, there might be actually a very different answer. So I guess my answer would be that it is crucial. I think that self-awareness, self-understanding, self-identification, and then also getting a diagnosis is typically what we're seeing from real life experiences, hearing from the stories of students, including the ones that were part of the steering group for this project. Really important in being able to access support, in being able to, as I just said, consider reasonable adjustments within the environment, within the ways that the university was supporting the student with various tasks like exams and stuff like that. I think we're seeing a shift around having an official diagnosis being the only kind of valid way that one does that. I mean, I think because the pace of change has been so rapid, I think it is right that at present, it is still about how accessing a diagnosis from, at present, the health system is the way to then identify those sets of needs that then should lead to a more individual conversation about that student's individual needs, rather than it just being, these are the adjustments or these are the supports that are specific to a particular diagnosis. But I think at present, it is the platform towards feeling less self-blame, shifting that to self-acceptance and accessing more tailored resources and accommodations. I think that in terms of young people that I've supported myself as a doctor, I can see how that self-identification and self-awareness it brings the immediate relief. So from a mental well-being kind of perspective, it has immediate kind of benefits. It helps validate their experiences. It gives them a bit of a language to kind of be chatting to peers about similar experiences. But typically, they usually require that diagnosis to then, whether it be in school or whether it be in university, then access more of those individual supports.
Well, thanks. Michael, do you want to come in?
Yeah, there was one standout thing for me with diagnosis and identity, and it was about being male and receiving it. I found it quite, I don't know, I found it quite emotionally tough and quite challenging, and I felt like I really kind of struggled with it for what I'd seen then, no clear reason, but now I think generally it was just because of the not stereotype, the stigma, the fear of stigma that it could bring with having that label attached to me. And I was quite worried about that. And I think I was more worried about how others may perceive me. And there was a word that you used, Arya, that was about feeling weak, about needing support in a way. And I think that was something that really when hearing that, I was like, oh, I think that was it, really, was that. And I think I've just learned from you, just had a little therapy moment just then, about what it was. But I don't know. I think over time, I really realized that diagnosis is just one part of the journey. And it's more about finding the community, self-acceptance, and learning more about your identity as well. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that bit about gender stereotypes, really, and the stigma.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Michael, and an exceptional advert for kind of peer support in action to all attendees. So thanks. I've got a question for all of you, and I'm going to try and tie a few different threads into one, and kind of this $1 million question really for our attendees with what changes would make university spaces more accessible for neurodivergent students. And I'm going to include within this thinking about social spaces, the academic spaces, and the support spaces. So thinking about things like the DSA, think about the experience of different communities and accessing support. If you want to touch upon all of those threads in your answer all in one go, and I'll come to each of you. And I'm not going to put anyone on the spot to go first, but Dr. Ashley, you look ready to go for it.
I was keen to kind of hear what Michael and Arya say first. Yeah, I think there's so much to do, isn't it? So this is not by any means the most important, but so certainly some of my more recent experiences, not only with supporting the steering group, but just with some local universities that I work with, is around giving a clear roadmap to how aspects of the curriculum, which is becoming more diverse in itself, certainly some of the courses that I'm linked in with, that there's a real desire to embrace kind of modern teaching kind of methods and go beyond the classroom, beyond the kind of lecture hall, but actually that then opens up a lot of potential factors, that might make learning in that type of space more difficult for a range of neurodivergent aspects and presentation. I think my encouragement would be that whilst we shouldn't stop innovation, I think that actually we need to be thinking a bit more carefully about the different ways that might present itself, kind of thing. And I think that we don't have to do it in the very traditional way that I would see most things getting done in some of the institutions that I've worked in, which is that a group of typically senior people, so academics, for example, in the university, sitting around a conference table thinking about what other potential risks might be, kind of thing. I think that actually young people and the students themselves are really keen to participate in that kind of co-thinking space around what possibilities might occur, and actually what possibilities might pose a risk or threat to, whatever you want to call that, but actually not require a full adjustment, that actually there might be a in-between space and a compromise, when you're trying to encourage kind of innovation. So my encouragement would be thinking in that educational space, but also as that moves out into a more experiential kind of space, how we try and work together in a co-create kind of way to try and find the best way kind of forward to allow those innovations to occur.
Thank you. Arya, were you ready to go next? You look good.
No, I actually wanted to touch on the social side of things, because there was, again, I don't know if any other institutions do this, but it was something that I saw for the first time at my institution. I went to the summer ball that the Royal Academy does every year for the first time this year. And it was in a very crowded space. It was a very small sort of closed up place, and then there were a lot of people. It was just very noisy. It was really overwhelming. So I really love the concept of a quiet room for studying, but there was a quiet room in the venue that they specifically put for people who were overwhelmed with the amount of stimulants that was going on. So I was actually able to go into the quiet room when I got really overwhelmed. I was able to recharge and then join the event afterwards. And having that was actually a really great way to provide, I think, accessibility for neurodivergent students to be able to take part in these activities. And then just an overall thing, I mean, we all know this, but I think it's important to reiterate, is that probably open communication is the best way to provide accessibility to students, because obviously depending on the institution that you're at, the profile of students that are going to be there, it's going to be different, and the things that they might need is going to be different. So I think having those moments of regular communication between students and staff, and providing an open space so that they are able to talk to staff and feel free to do so without almost feeling like they would be judged for it. I think that's very important. But yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I'll be quick. But yeah, like for me, I think universities could do so much more to make spaces like university accessible, essentially. I think sometimes adjustments rely on us as students to disclose or just fight for them so often. And I think that should be kind of taken away, and it should just be, a given, that it would be accessible. And I think things like clearer signposting or just accessible digital tools like Grammarly should just, I don't get why not everyone has Grammarly. Like, just give it to everyone. And like, I don't know, like even just flexible teaching like formats, like my uni allowed it to, you don't have to sit in the main lecture room. They'll do it like, they'll broadcast it in a smaller room and you can just sit in there if you want. And it's like, why is that not, given to everyone? But I think it would just help everyone. And I also found another thing that really, really just, support systems. DSA is exceptionally supportive, right? Like we all know it can give you a lot of things. I didn't even know it exists until, another student told me about it. And I think it just shows how word of mouth between students and between neurodivergent community really often replaces just proper guidance and information given by universities. And I think the process itself of DSA obviously can be long and complicated. And I also think that universities, to make it more accessible, can kind of just create like a survival guide type thing, a centralized resource of how, to survive uni in a way, like, I mean, a bit like what we've done with these podcasts, a bit like creating one for themselves of just, this is it specifically for your institution. Yeah, there was a few things there. I don't know if it actually came out properly.
No, that was wonderful. And again, set me up beautifully to segue in talking about the kind of co-creation process we took with all of you and about what we developed at the content package. So I'm conscious of time, and I'll remind attendees that we've got the Q&A box open and we're starting to have some incredible questions come in, and I want to make sure we have time to speak to them because I think some absolutely great topics have come up. So Dr. Ashley, if you could just give us a brief overview of the co-creation process for this project, just as so hopefully some useful learning for attendees in terms of something they might want to kind of mirror and replicate within their own institution.
Yeah, sure. I mean, really briefly, I guess we put a call out, which Michael and Arya kind of responded to as widely as possible to understand lived experience. I think that was the kind of first tenet of it, and that certainly formed the main focus around our first meeting, that we just wanted to hear people's lived experience, have the students feel that it was a shared safe space, that they could be sharing the realities of being a neurodivergent student. And the practicalities of things meant that the next time we met, we needed to start really focusing on content creation. So we looked at different themes, through different lenses. We broke up into little pairs and trios and rotated to try and think about aspects around content creation in the second meeting. I think I certainly loved all the creative ideas that were popping up as part of the students discussing things amongst themselves. I think the fact that what we talked about earlier about the real heterogeneous kind of spectrum of differences, but kind of real strengths amongst the different neurodivergent kind of profiles, I think was really evident to me as part of that kind of creation kind of process. So that was it in a nutshell.
Brilliant, thanks. And I'm going to do a really difficult job in talking to Arya and Michael about how they found being part of the steering group. I mean, you said some nice and positive things so far in terms of how respectful space it was, and how you kind of felt seen and built commonality. But as ever, we're keen to get learnings within this space. So what do you think we could improve, do differently? What do you think works well? It's important to kind of hear. And then if you want to talk as kind of a part of your experience in being part of the co-creation process, just about what you ended up contributing to the project in terms of the podcasts that you guys ended up developing, just as a little bit of a teaser for attendees before we move on to Q&A. Arya, you look good to go, so I'll come to you.
Yeah, I never know which one of us should start. For me, the steering group meetings, it was a great experience, honestly, because kind of like what I touched on previously, it was a very safe space for us to be able to talk about our experiences again, and everybody was completely invested in what each of us were saying, and everybody sort of took part in creating that space in which people could show up authentically as themselves. I actually am not going to say necessarily anything to improve, but the reason why is because I think that the conversations evolved very organically. And of course, we had sort of a set structure in place, and there were certain agenda items that we needed to get through, and there were certain things that we wanted to find answers to in terms of creating the best content possible. But I'm not going to touch on it in that sense because I think that within that structure, like I said, there was a lot of space for the conversation to evolve naturally and organically. So I think that for me personally, it was a great experience in that sense to be able to share everything that I wanted to in the meeting. And in terms of video and podcast, Michael and I did a video together, which was we talked about 5 things that we wish we knew before coming to university as a neurodivergent student. And actually, the most validating part of the video process was simply speaking to Michael about how we were going to go about creating it, because, like I said, we sort of had a great space of sharing our experiences with each other. And we found that we had a lot of common points because we had a lot of experiences that, due to the fact that we're neurodivergent, we were able to relate to each other. So that was great. And another thing that I took away from that was the fact that finding things that work for you is just important as finding things that don't work for you. But I think if you watch the videos, we touch on everything further there. And in the podcast, I chose to talk about studying, and this was something that I was very passionate about because I'm also, aside from the Royal Academy of Music, I'm doing an online business degree, so I'm just balancing a lot of different things and have to study a lot of material. And it took me a long time to establish certain systems that worked for me. And I sort of realized that, especially for neurodivergent people, it's completely about optimizing your environment to work in your favor as a student, so that you're able to operate as your best self while studying and be able to take in all of the information. And the most validating conversation that we had in the podcast was the co-host that we did a podcast with, Lisa. She's a psychology student at the University of Nottingham, and she's super intelligent, very eloquent, and she basically said that if these tips don't work for you, it's completely okay. And that was very validating for me because I sometimes used to feel like if I would, for example, watch videos on YouTube that said, "Oh, here are these study tips, and if they don't work for you, you're doing it completely wrong." But actually having that conversation about saying, we're just giving you options and tools that you can use, and you can pick out any of them if you like, and if you don't, that's completely fine as well. I feel like that was very validating. Yeah.
Well, thanks. Michael, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry. No, for myself personally, I really enjoyed being part of the steering group. I think it worked really well. And Arya, I think you touched on it because of how just collaborative it felt. It really felt as if our lived experiences really did help shape the direction of these podcasts and videos, even just down to even the topics being chosen. And it really felt that way instead of just us being used, that tokenistic collaboratives, it didn't feel like that at all. It wasn't tokenistic. And I enjoyed it just purely because of how many perspectives and the wide range of perspectives that everyone brought as well. And it was really important as well, because as we've mentioned, throughout this, neurodivergency is so broad and different for everyone. And it was just really nice to hear everyone's experiences. And I think one thing that I would have loved, and unfortunately just because of time, I feel like we didn't do it, was just hearing more and having more of an open discussion about people's stories. People were saying one word or one line, and I was like, I want to know more. I'm on the edge of my seat. But it was just that. And I think that really links in with community, right? And actually just, hearing from other people. I think that's something I wish that our neurodivergency community did more of. And universities facilitated. The content itself, I did the podcast of diagnosis, discovery, and daily life, because there were just points in my journey, realistically, that I felt were the hardest, but also the most relatable to myself as well. The conversation about the conversation was just purely about just how university can be quite overwhelming. It was very validating process to do the podcast, because I don't know, it really made me realize that it's something that a lot of students go through, but it often isn't spoken about, how you can feel overwhelmed at uni. And yeah, it was just nice to speak to the co-host there and actually just have a general conversation about it. But yeah, something that really stood out to me in the podcast was just not that we focused on just our struggles in a way. It was also, as Arya was saying, we really highlighted just like strategies and the strengths and the routines that you could really like embed as well. And yeah, I hope the podcast can just really be helpful and very practical for so many students.
And you've set me up brilliantly to segue in acknowledging the struggle of never having enough time to talk about this brilliant topic. We've got, I think, about a dozen questions that I'm sat on, and 5 minutes with all yourselves and all of our attendees obviously having to go off soon. So I'm going to suggest I try and find one question for each of you to answer briefly. And then to all attendees, I'm sorry that we don't have time to get into all the questions you've asked, but many of them, here's my teaser, probably will get touched upon within the videos and the resources and the podcasts. So engage with those, share those, all of the tips and tricks you're kind of requesting in the questions will get touched upon by our fantastic group of student group members. So engage with the content we've put out, and hopefully many of these questions will get answered. But to pick out a question for each of you, Michael, there's a question here, and I'll give everyone a second to mull, around self-advocacy, and kind of what tips you've got in terms of helping people build confidence and skills when it comes to self-advocating. And particular context, and this is going to be relevant for you, is thinking about the post-graduation plans and kind of self-advocating outside of the university environment going into employment. Dr. Ashley, I think one of the questions I might give to you is on whether there's enough understanding within kind of professional communities around what neurodivergence is, and how staff might be able to identify students that need support without relying on students coming to them. So how does staff find the students first and be proactive with support? And then Arya, if you're happy to speak to it, there's a question on any challenges, if any, in working on group projects, kind of that social, academic, collaborative working, and what your experience has been with that. And we've got 3 minutes before I'm sure many people are going to shoot off. So a minute each, but if anyone is shooting off, thank you so much for coming. If you can linger on a little bit more to hear these answers, you're very welcome, but we'll follow up with more of the resources. And I hope I've stalled enough to give you all time to think. So Michael, do you want to say anything on self-advocacy briefly?
Yeah, I'll be very quick for the others, but I think it was one of the hardest but most important skills I kind of really had to learn and build on. At first, it felt really uncomfortable to kind of really speak up for your needs. I didn't want to feel like as if I was getting special treatment. But what really helped me was reframing it as self-advocacy isn't kind of just asking for like favors in a way. It's just making sure that I can perform my best in university. And to do that was really learning the language. We spoke so much about language in this, and it's really just, I don't know, like having a kind of a dictionary of what language actually is important in this world of like, you know, being able to get what you need in DSA and to be able to explain your needs to the university. Another thing for me was just realistically highlighting my strengths as well as my needs. I think just framing my adjustments as something that allows me to show my strengths really shifted the conversation for me. So for example, when I say like, when I have a quiet space, you know, I can produce so much more focused and detailed work, for example, right? It's just, I don't know, it tweaks something in me. And I think that really helps with, you know, the postgraduate route, right? When you go into jobs and you're sitting down and like, what reasonable adjustments do you need? It really helped me with being able to say, I need this because of it makes me do that in a way. I think it made me look like as if I wasn't explaining a weakness, but more of a strength for me. I don't know if that answers that question, but.
No, it does, absolutely. Dr. Ashley.
It's a difficult one to answer briefly. I mean, I think in terms of the question, I guess that could pertain to both students who are recognizing differences, but maybe for all sorts of reasons are finding it more of a struggle to come forward. But it could also be ones that actually it's the community around them, it's their support. You know, it's the staff that are recognizing those differences, and actually they might not have that kind of self-insight. I mean, I think that it's tricky that if someone doesn't have that self-insight, that you're necessarily, you know, maybe progressing adjustments already, or kind of like, encouraging them to kind of go and get the diagnosis. I think it just requires an honest kind of conversation individually with that student. I think there was a query from the questioner about, if there was an intersection with maybe minority groups or other aspects that might make it more of a difficult thing to kind of come forward and self-identify, because obviously there might be other pressures upon them, kind of thing. And I think that it goes back to what we were saying earlier, isn't it, around just creating that much more receptive environment across, and it doesn't have to be the whole university, isn't it? It could just be within what you have control of in that department or that faculty or that class, kind of thing, and I think that's the kind of first step for certainly from a staff member's kind of perspective. Lastly, just really quickly, I think just to acknowledge, which we haven't already so far, that actually health services are struggling around the kind of more official diagnostic routes in this country. I think that's well publicized, and actually some universities have taken more initiatives around trying to think about how they might maybe go outside kind of NHS kind of pathways, but in a more systematic way also, be ensuring the kind of right support through student support kind of departments. And I think whilst, I appreciate that that's a sticking plaster over a much bigger problem across our NHS kind of thing, I think that actually if universities are serious about wanting to support neurodivergent students, that'd be something I would encourage them to be doing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And Arya, wrapping us up on the joy of collaborative working.
Yeah, the quickest way to do this, and I'm just going to be very quick with this. I think clear division of tasks is very important, especially for neurodivergent students. If you know exactly what you're supposed to do, it's much easier to do it. Again, I cannot speak about this enough. It's the optimization of systems that work for you. So within a group setting, it's just being able to say, this person's going to do this person's going to do this, and these are the strengths of each individual, how we can play into that. But again, like I said, just establishing clear systems, that's the best way to go in a collaborative process.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nice and punchy. I'm conscious we've already overrun a little bit of time, so I'm so sorry to all the questions we've not gotten to. Lots of people keen for tips and tricks and more resources and websites and systems and tools that staff and students can benefit from in terms of making things more accessible. But I'm just going to tease people to all of the wonderful resources that we already have live, the resources that will be becoming live in October. We will email and follow up with everyone with the insights report and let people know when all of those podcasts are up and running. So give them a listen, engage with them, share them with your students. Hopefully it's useful. Thank you so much to all of you who attended. I hope it's been interesting and insightful and engaging for you. And thank you, of course, to all of our wonderful panelists, Dr. Ashley, Arya, Michael, in all the work you've done on the project and in participating in this webinar. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their afternoons.